Hello, I'm Simon. Welcome back to the workshop. Now, if you're a regular viewer, you'll know that Creality recently sent me their Falcon 2 22-watt laser, and I've started experimenting with how I can use it in the workshop. Now, a problem that I'm sure many of you will empathise with is where do you put a machine like a laser cutter when space is of a premium. So this video is all about how I'm going to house this machine permanently in my workshop, given that I have very little space available. Let's get tinkering. Now here's a wide angle view of my workshop. It's 3.6 metres by 3.6 metres. That's about 12 foot by 12 foot. And you can see there isn't any wall space left. And I like to keep the centre clear for my workmate. And you can see here that the enclosure doesn't even fit on my workbench. But I had a cunning plan. I'm going to swap one problem for a lot of smaller problems by repurposing the storage under my bench, which is currently just storing bits and bobs. Now the space under here isn't actually big enough, so I'm going to have to make some modifications to my workbench. Now let's just take you through the size of the problem that I have. Firstly, I don't have the width to fit the air compressor inside the cupboard as well, at least not width-wise. And I can't put it on a shelf above because there's not enough height to clear these cables here. So I need to find a solution for where I'm going to put the air assist pump. The other problem I have is that depth-wise, the space under my workbench finishes here. So I've got about 3 inches that currently will be in front of the door for the enclosure, and obviously that's not going to work. To try and visualise this problem a bit better, I need to find about 5 inches, otherwise I'm not going to be able to put a door on this, and it's therefore not going to be an enclosed cabinet, which is what I need. The back and the top of the workbench aren't enclosed either, so they'll need enclosing. So I've rifled through my stock and I now think I know what I'm doing. I'm using a load of lumber that was an old IKEA airing cupboard shelf, and then I've got a load of these sheets of 3mm thick aluminium, which were given to me about 10 years ago. I've always thought there must be a use for these, and I've never been able to use them. This has the advantage of making the enclosure reasonably fireproof. And just look at how well these aluminium sheets fit the enclosure space. You'd think they'd been made for it. It's just a complete luck, but I'll take it when I'm given it. I start by ripping this piece of 4x2 down to 2x2. And I'll cut these to length on the table saw. I'm drilling these slightly off of centre so that the screw goes into the pine frame of the workbench rather than the end grain of the plywood sides. I can now extend the back of the workbench by about 2 3/4 inches. This will allow me to push the laser cutter further back than would otherwise be possible. This won't create all the space I need, but will go a long way towards it. This aluminium sheet will separate the drawer that holds all my router bits from the enclosure, keeping all the dust out. Adding the sides completes the rear extension of the workbench cupboard. I'm going to build a sliding base for the laser engraver. This will give me better access to it when setting up for a cut. The sliding base will accommodate the laser engraver and will also fit in place the honeycomb base. And by doing this will mean that everything moves as a single unit, so I'll be able to set up pieces of work, slide the laser engraver back in, close the doors, and then start the job. Here I'm making some mounts for the feet. These will be secured to the plate that slides in and out of the workbench and allow the laser engraver to stay in exactly the same position with relation to that plate at all times. But it will also allow me to lift the laser engraver completely out should I need to do some maintenance or want to use it elsewhere in the workshop. So here is the plate that will slide in and out. Now I'm not using draw runners or anything like that because I don't want this moving when the laser is moving backwards and forward. I want it to stay still, and I thought that draw runners, it's going to be a little bit too easy for the whole thing to shift, and I didn't really want that. The engraver is simply sitting inside these little feet, and these feet are going to be secured to this plate. These feet also are a friction fit against the honeycomb bed. And that means that the honeycomb bed and the machine will all move in unison when this slides out. Because it's a friction fit and not actually stuck or fixed in any other way, it does mean that I can easily remove the bed if I need to clean up underneath it due to any little small pieces that get stuck inside the honeycomb. Now I've only used carpet tape to stick these down to the aluminium plate. I was going to use some two-part epoxy, but it's a bit too cold to use the epoxy at this time of year, so I'm just temporarily using this tape. I say temporarily because I tried readjusting one of the pieces and I couldn't actually get it off, so I think they might actually become the permanent solution. So this is going to slide on PTFE tape runners, and I've got this PTFE tape left over from when I fixed my table saw fence. I need to extend the aluminium base all the way to the front. So I cut an aluminium sheet to size. Using the bandsaw on aluminium I think of as being equivalent to cutting a piece of hardwood. It doesn't really damage the blade as far as I can tell. I'll do a test fit to make sure everything's moving in the right direction. Moving the laser cutter is really easy. It's smooth but has a little bit of friction to it. So I don't think that the laser moving backwards and forwards is going to actually move the machine at all. But it's not as silky smooth as, say, a ball bearing draw runner would be. Now that all the sides are lined in aluminium, I can put the back on. So there's still quite a bit to do, but I think I'm moving in the right direction. The cupboard itself is all lined in 3mm thick aluminium, so it should be reasonably fire resistant. I'm not going to say fireproof because it certainly won't be that, but it will be resistant to fire and to heat. I'm going to put something on the front down here like this that will fold down so that it's not in the way when I slide this out. This gives me plenty of access to arrange my pieces on here, and it slides back in nicely. I still have to work on where I'm going to put the air assist pump, the power supply and the venting for the fume extraction. So there's still quite a bit to do, and then on top of that I also want to include some in-cabinet lights and a webcam. Here I am adding some kitchen cupboard hinges to the piece that's going to flap down so it doesn't get in the way of the sliding platform. This is not the easiest of positions to film. I'm going to put the fan at the back at the top. Smoke rises because it's hot, so that's where the smoke will accumulate. I'm putting it at the back because the whole of the unit is completely airtight except for the front. That will draw the air from the gaps in the front towards the back, and therefore the smoke away from the only place that it can escape. Here I'm using the jigsaw to cut a hole for the fan. So the ducting connector and fan have been now fitted into the cupboard, and those two wires you can see coming out, one is for lights and the other is for the power for the fan. And here you can see the inside of the cabinet and some of the lighting and the extractor fan that will pull the smoke out of the cabinet and through the ducting and out the window. The fan is at the top because smoke rises, and it's at the back so that the smoke is pulled from the front towards the back so that there is a negative air pressure for any gaps that are in the front doors. The air will be pulled from the front towards the fan. So the idea by having the fan at the back is that the fan will create a slight negative pressure which will pull air from the front doors through the gaps into the cabinet and out to the back, therefore drawing the smoke away from the front doors and keeping the workshop smoke free. One of the things I now have left to do is to fit the door, and to do that I'm going to use some piano hinge. The door itself is going to be made of some specialist acrylic. This acrylic is designed for laser cabinets, thus making it safe. The laser already has a shroud around the laser which will do a similar job, so this will just protect anyone who doesn't have their goggles on when they walk into the workshop from being exposed to that laser light. But first I need to trim this very expensive piece of plastic to size. I say expensive, I did look at a UK supplier and they wanted £150 for an A4 sheet, and I would have needed 2 A4 sheets. So that would have been £300 plus £10 postage, £310. That was more than I was willing to spend. I found an eBay site that was selling a similar plastic with similar properties, and this was £50 for one sheet that's 600mm by 300mm. Obviously this is still very expensive when you think that the whole Creality enclosure is under £100, and that comes with the fan, the enclosure, and the enclosure has these laser windows in as well. So you may be able to source something cheaper. I wasn't willing to just go with an orange acrylic. I wanted to go with something that had been specified as being suitable for protecting users from lasers at the frequency or the wavelength that this laser actually works at. The last thing I need to do is bring the fume extractor hose to the front of the bench. And to do that I need to first make a bracket. This is going to be a piece of 2x4 that I'll cut down on the bandsaw. And as a hose adapter, I'm just using an old baked bean can. Well, this has turned out a lot better than I expected. I've managed to find a space in my tiny workshop for my laser cutter, so it's no longer cluttering the place up. I've also been able to produce something that has a certain amount of fire resistance to it and is reasonably dust proof. I'm hoping that whilst it is slightly open at the front, putting the extraction fan at the rear of the unit will help draw the clean air from the workshop into the front and then the smoke out of the dust extraction unit, rather than letting the smoke come out of the front of the unit. But we'll find out how well that works in the next video. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, then please subscribe. It's completely free, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.